This is Gridiron Graduates, a weekly podcast covering all things football. Episode number 14, Trimming the Fat. Recorded September 2nd, 2015.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome again to another edition of the Gridiron Graduates. Glad to have you back with us. I am your boy, Bill Rossetti, welcoming you back. And I'm going to kick it over to the Bob's Discount Furniture Studio and bring in Ian Morton. How you doing?
I am good. We've almost made it. We're one day from college football. And as you're listening to this, it may be tonight, Thursday night. And we are 8 days from recording, which if you're listening to this on Thursday, we are a week away from NFL football. So if I had to describe my mood, it is simply we've made it. And that's always the best feeling.
It honestly is. You know, the only thing that sucks about the NFL is the off season is so long. You know,
8 months. I think has it been like 7 or 8 months? I think 7 months.
Just about, yeah. You figure, I mean, not counting the preseason games, the last meaningful game we've watched was about 7 months ago. Yeah. So it's a long process to get from the Super Bowl back to starting it all over again. You know, the only other sport that mirrors this lengthy off season is college basketball. So it's really nice to finally be back in this position and to be so close and know that we're almost there. So just have to hang in a little bit more. I do want to give a quick shout out to our boys down at Redland Little League. Great run in the Little League World Series. I was actually in Williamsport on Saturday for the United States Championship game, and boy, what an atmosphere that was.
Wow, that's awesome.
It was almost like being at a major league game with how much the crowd was behind Redland. You know, for a group of 12 and 13-year-olds, we were just going nuts with the hits, especially the 2 home runs. Me personally, like, I'm high-fiving everybody and going crazy. And then when Chayton hit that game-winning RBI, I couldn't see the hit, but everyone was cheering, so I'm like, yeah, you know, we're going nuts. We're so excited that they won the U.S. title. And the nice thing, too, is that I can now say that I'm one of the 45,000-plus people that set a record for the largest crowd in Little League World Series history. So,
that is awesome.
It was awesome. It was an amazing experience. You know, unfortunately, they couldn't win the world title, but boy, what a game that was on Sunday. Just, I don't know how much, if you were able to catch it, but boy, when they put up 10 runs in the first, I thought this game was overdone. PA's going to win the world title. But then Japan just comes storming back, and I'm just like, oh boy. But in any event, you know, great for them to still be crowned U.S. champions. First time in 25 years that the state of Pennsylvania, a team from the state of Pennsylvania, actually won the U.S. title. So just want to give a shout out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Congratulations to them.
So let's jump into it. Let's actually talk a little bit of football here. I think some of the big topics we'll discuss today are, you know, certainly we've had the cuts this week. We had the cuts to 75, and for the most part, you know, usually 95% of the players are guys we know aren't going to make the roster anyway. You know, you see these guys playing like the fourth quarter of the first preseason game, and you're like, yeah, he's not making the roster. But certainly there are some names that are well known that were released by their teams, and some of them, probably the most surprising, I would say, is Fred Jackson of Buffalo. Tim Jennings was also cut by Chicago. And then he's certainly a well-known name, but it's also kind of not surprising. Trent Richardson, cut by the Raiders. So what were your take on some of the cuts we saw this week?
I'll go from most talented to least talented. I thought Tim Jennings was kind of surprising. He's a little bit older as a cornerback. He was making quite a bit of money. I don't have the exact figure in front of me, but I believe it was upwards of $4 or $5 million a year. And the Bears, I thought he's still a pretty decent player. I think public opinion on him is fairly low, but I think that's because of the unit as a whole hasn't been good. So the Chicago Bears defense has been pretty poor for a few years, and in turn, it's very hard for a cornerback to look good when that's the case. But in reality, I still have a pretty high opinion of him. I think he's a starter caliber player for most teams out there, even if it is just for 1 or 2 more years. But that was a little bit of a surprise for me. I felt like that's a little bit of a punt on this season. Whenever you cut a starting veteran like that, I can't imagine that's really a good message you want to send to the locker room as far as what you're trying to accomplish for this year. So that was a surprise. I was also surprised at Fred Jackson, especially that's the third leading rusher franchise history behind Thurman Thomas and O.J. Simpson. So that was pretty shocking, especially for a team that wants to run the ball a ton this year. Gonna be honest, I don't really agree with Rex on that one. Whether or not it was Rex that made that decision, I don't know. But whoever made that decision in that building, I had read earlier actually that the GM may have kind of gone rogue on that decision. So if that was the case, shame on him. I know that this game isn't really about sentimentality. You have to be able to make those tough calls whenever you're faced with them. But he's still a good player, and at 34 years old, it's not like he was going to be a big cap issue moving forward. It was just really surprising that move happened. And then, I'll go with Phil Taylor as the next guy from the Cleveland Browns. That was a little surprising. So Phil Taylor's a big defensive tackle, kind of been miscast in Cleveland in a 3-4 role. He's not a gap eater. He's more of a penetrator. Mm-hmm. He had a lot of injury issues over the last couple of years, and I think that's really what it boiled down to. But still, nonetheless, surprising for a team that has a lot of cap space. I didn't really expect them to get rid of him because they didn't really need to get rid of him. Right. But they do have a really deep defensive line, so I guess you're going with maybe your guys that are a little bit cheaper as well.
And it's interesting. A couple of years ago, I took part in Kian Fahi's PSRWP, making sure I got the lettering right there, Pre-Snap Reads Writers Project, kind of like what Matt Waldman did, where we basically started our own roster from scratch. Phil Taylor was actually one of my picks as I was building my defense. I'd always been a bit of a Phil Taylor fan.
Yeah.
So,
good player.
4 years in after a first-round pick. And an interesting stat a couple people brought up on Twitter is that the Browns now have none of the picks that they had acquired in the Julio Jones trade. All the players they drafted from the picks acquired from Atlanta are now gone. So, what does that tell you about the state of the Browns organization?
That's a big reason too why I'm more best player available. I'm not a fan of these trade downs. The RG3 trade I think was a little bit different. That was a very unique trade offer. But I tell you what, like these big trade downs, when you have a chance of getting elite talent, just take the elite talent. And you run the risk of that guy not working out. There's always that inherent risk. I mean, you mentioned Trent Richardson. He was one of those guys that, everybody and their mother missed on. And look, there's nothing to be ashamed of. Everyone missed on him. I think at least you take the stab and you take the calculated risk because honestly, what's a second or third round pick worth? Chances are they're not going to be any good, and it's valuable currency, but and it's crucial because if you hit on those picks, it's that defines good teams from bad teams, but realistically, not many of those guys hit. So I think it's important when especially the Browns, they just, and it's very revisionist history, but even at the time, take the guy that can come in, contribute, be a high-level player. The only reason that you're making that type of trade down is if you really don't believe in any guys available. And quite simply, on a team like the Browns, there's no reason to think like that.
And even like a team like the Falcons, like, we did see them once in the NFC Championship, but can we really say the trade worked out for them too? You make a trade like that, you're thinking, okay, we're maybe this player away from reaching the Super Bowl or something like that. And granted, like I said, yeah, they were pretty close, but were they always that close, especially at the time they made the trade? And now they're coming off back-to-back losing seasons, and certainly Julio's injuries have affected that. They just gave up on a former second-round pick, Peter Kahn. So, it's definitely interesting with these trades. And on Trent Richardson, yeah, he was absolutely talented coming out of Alabama. A lot of people, even when Mark Ingram was still at Alabama, there were people that thought Richardson was better than Ingram and would be a better prospect, and rightfully so. We just never figured that he would seemingly lose interest or wouldn't have such a strong work ethic to stay in the NFL. And it still just makes it amazing in hindsight that Cleveland was able to get a first-round pick from Indianapolis for Trent Richardson. But, hey, it is what it is, I guess. And, we've bashed Ryan Grigson in the past, and he's deserved some of that beating. I mean, let's be honest. Other than maybe some of his picks in 2011 or 2012, I should say, he hasn't hit on much.
No.
And
very lucky on the Vontae Davis trade with Miami.
Mm-hmm.
He got lucky with T.Y. Hilton. And then obviously Andrew Luck was an obvious decision.
Yeah.
Everyone in the league. There was a lot of momentum toward Robert Griffin III at that time, but no one was actually going to take Robert Griffin over Andrew Luck. I mean, was it a discussion for the media? Yeah, absolutely, because it's a fun discussion to have. But it was not. I don't think it was ever a realistic choice. So
I think Grigson would have been fired on the spot if they actually went with RG3 at the time.
Right. Everyone knew that was going to happen. So.
And I guess that leads us right into the RG3 discussion. I guess we got to touch on that. The fact that RG3 is no longer the starter in Washington. Redskins announcing that Kirk Cousins will be the starter week 1. Very surprising, but if the guy can't play to a concussion, I guess you also don't have much of a choice, and your hands kind of forced.
Well, it's been interesting because here locally, obviously I live in Northern Virginia now, and so all I hear about is RG3, and it was really interesting as they were kind of parsing through the press conference, and make no mistake about it, this was a move made independently of the concussion. He announced the starter as Kirk Cousins for the 2015 season, and had it just been for the concussion, I think we would have heard a different phrase, and I think we would have heard,
That's a good point, yeah.
just for the meantime, anything like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Right. So, this is a permanent move, and honestly, I think we may see the end of this relationship very soon. Because ultimately, I don't know how you can keep Robert Griffin in DC and expect that to be a healthy relationship between them two.
Yeah.
We know that Robert is, personality-wise, he's deflected a lot of blame onto teammates, and he's got an ego. And look, he's a superstar, and he has been since college. So I'm not saying that he's in the wrong for that. I'm not saying that, he's a bad guy. I'm certainly not saying that. But what I am saying is he's going to be difficult to keep in the locker room if he's not playing. I think he's proven as much so far, and there's nothing to suggest that that's going to change. And maybe that's not fair to expect him to change. That's just how things are. So, if you're the Redskins, let me ask you this. Because if you keep him on the roster, what's going to happen is obviously you'll release him at the end of the year, but if you keep him on the roster, you're going to keep paying him. And if he gets hurt for a significant injury, that $16 million option
kicks in.
Right. Now it's only injury guaranteed. So if an injury happens in practice, even if he doesn't play in a game, it could be guaranteed. Or do you cut him because you're going to pay him anyway not to play? If you keep him and just deactivate him every single week, which I think is a realistic option, because again, the goal is to not pay him on um, that giant
The big option, yeah.
option. Yeah. So, or do you cut him, take the cap hit, which again isn't a huge deal because he'd be earning that money anyways, and just to get him off the team. Which one do you kind of go with? Because I think it's a difficult choice to make because you're cutting a big talent, like as far as a guy that could have an impact on your team, or is it just not worth the potential headache?
Yeah, it's almost saying like 2012 was a huge. I mean, benching him now is pretty much saying 2012 was a huge mistake. Cutting him is the icing on the cake, but that's a tough decision for sure. But I think they would maybe lean towards just keeping him and maybe keeping him on the bench so that they avoid the chance of him getting hurt, and then by the end of the season, just cutting him loose so they can get rid of that $16 million. Because as you said, if he plays and say he suffers another injury like he did last season with the ankle or whatever the case may be, then just like that, that's 16 million right there,
Right.
and now they're in trouble. They're essentially stuck with a guy that, let's face it, everybody except God himself there in Washington doesn't want.
Yeah.
So I guess in that sense you just keep him on the bench and just pray that Kirk Cousins stays out. I guess even if Kirk Cousins were to go down, they'll probably just go to Colt McCoy
Yeah.
just to kind of save themselves too. They don't necessarily have to rush Griffin right back in there. And yeah, I mean, they've had problems, in different places in the offense as well. Like certainly the game where he got concussed, the offensive line wasn't the greatest, but when you look back at it, you still have some young guys there that are trying to gel together. Guys like Brandon Sheriff, guys like Morgan Moses. Your starting left tackle isn't even in the lineup in that game, so there's issues there. But eventually we have to get to the point where Griffin has to be held accountable. It's been 4 years now. I understand he's had these injuries, and it's kind of sapped his athleticism, and he's not able to scramble as much as he has. But the fact is, he's not able to make the kind of throws that make elite NFL quarterback. So it's an unfortunate situation for Washington to be in. You hate to see a team take a big gamble like that in the draft and have it blow up in their face, but a lot of people are certainly going to look back at it and say, maybe along the lines of "we told you so," or they could have told you back then that making this move was a bad move. So I don't know. It's just Washington being Washington, I guess.
Yeah, it's unfortunate too. I mean, I really do feel for fan bases like Washington, Cleveland, Oakland. Those teams, they really don't deserve that. The fans don't, and it's unfortunate.
Oh
but,
yeah, because their fan bases are extremely passionate.
Right.
Sure.
Right. So, I mean, eventually it makes its way around, and success will come. But it's been a tough road for him so far.
I think, unfortunately for Washington, that success may not fully get there until Dan Snyder's out the door.
Yeah. Yeah. You always look back to what's constant, and it usually starts at the top.
Yep. But obviously, the man at the top doesn't see that way. He still wants. And I thought, because when the reports came out that there was this bit of rift between, the football minds and Dan Snyder about Robert Griffin, I'm thinking to myself, I thought Snyder was going to back out of football decisions now. I thought when McClugan came in, Snyder was going to kind of back away. Now all of a sudden he's back in the picture, and it's like, isn't this where this problem started? But I guess when you're the owner, it's hard to step away like that after you've been involved so much. Involved badly, but involved. So But again, that's why they're the Washington Redskins right now.
Yeah.
Um,
It's going
and
to be a rough season. I mean, that may be a team that,
yeah, it's going to be a long one for sure.
yeah, that may be a team that honestly wins maybe just 3 or 4 games, and you may be looking at a top 5 pick again, and hopefully one of these quarterbacks emerges for them to pick from.
Yeah, like we were talking about a couple weeks ago, how deep the quarterback pool is. You know, if they have a high enough pick, it's a chance to maybe turn it around. And we certainly can't can't overlook the chance of there being a new head coach in Washington as well in 2016. I wouldn't say Jay Gruden's seat is cold. It may not be burning hot right now, but it's warming up a little bit. I understand he has the fully guaranteed contract, but at least head coaches' salaries don't count towards the cap, so it's not like they would fire him and his remaining salary is knocked from their salary cap. So it should be interesting. And I guess we'll mention quick the unfortunate story that just happened with the Redskins involving the wife of Scott McCloughan. What a mess this story is, if you guys didn't hear it. Jessica McCloughan, wife of Scott McCloughan, was found to have tweeted an inappropriate remark to former NBC Washington reporter and now ESPN reporter Diana Marie Rossini, I guess involving a story regarding the switch at quarterback. And I guess there was talk that maybe the account was fake and this, that, whatever, but it just comes out recently. Actually at the time of recording this, maybe about an hour before we're talking right now, that the account was not fake. And the Redskins have actually, I think the Redskins and Jessica have both made statements, apologizing for the tweet. So, like we said, Washington gonna Washington.
Yeah, it's never ending.
Never ending.
It's, who knows if it's true, but send in those jokes.
Well, it sounds like it's
I like
true.
reading those jokes.
Like I said, it sounds like they've actually had Jessica come out and make a statement.
Oh, okay.
Saying that the tweet, I think it was Scott actually that confirmed the tweet and the account was real, and they've come out and apologized. And this is a family-friendly show, so we won't exactly get into the details of the tweet. You can look it up for yourself.
Yeah.
It's not exactly nice, but we'll leave it at that. In any event, I think that kind of covers what we want to talk about a little bit for the NFL this week. Because certainly, the upcoming week in the preseason is more or less to find the bottom players of your roster. Because we're into the 4th preseason game. Thank God, it's almost over. The week where starters maybe play one series, if that.
Yeah.
And then they're out of there, and it's all about the backups and, players like 40 through 75 competing for spots 40 through 53. Or up to 63 if those players are able to get on the practice squad, whichever way you want to look at it. So, not exactly going to get into too much detail on that.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, I'm probably not even going to rewatch, most of these games. So, an unusual week, I'll watch every game. I'll just go back and some of them more in depth than others. Some of them I'll just kind of, if you go through NFL Game Pass, for those that don't know, you can watch like a condensed version of the game. Basically, it just takes out everything but the plays. And it's a really nice way to quickly get through a game in like 20, 30 minutes. Depending on, what all you're actually watching. Obviously, it's, 15-minute quarters, so it should take you about an hour, but you can get through stuff pretty quick because it'll chop some of that up as well. So, but I tell you what, I mean, next week, or I should say this week, week 4, there's not much you can get from it. It's more of just for coaching staffs. If you really want to see those young guys, this is a good place to see them, but the competition is very low. So I think, if you're thirsting for football, I think college football it's really the way to go this weekend.
I mean, just as an example, Matt Barkley's going to be the starting quarterback for the Eagles tomorrow against the Jets.
Yeah. He probably won't even make the roster. So
yeah, that's going to be the interesting decision for sure. But yeah, you have the preseason games tomorrow. Friday is the final cut down to 53, and then Saturday is when teams can start building their practice squad. And here's your reminder to those listening. The 53 players that make up the roster on Friday will not, I repeat, will not be the 53 on the roster come week 1. There will be changes, I promise you.
Oh, yeah.
Players being signed to practice squads, teams plucking players from other practice squads onto their active roster. So, just because you're following a player and you see that he's made the 53 on Friday, you still got to get to Saturday and even Sunday, Monday, to really get the finalized roster. I think to be really safe in the roster you're looking at, you probably have to wait until maybe Monday at the earliest when teams will actually start game planning for week 1. So, with that happy thought in mind, you mentioned college is a good is a good way to watch football tomorrow. Yes, the football bowl subdivision actually starts tomorrow. Thank God again. We have live college football, actual live games. And actually, as we mentioned last week, the first game was actually Saturday in the football championship series. And wouldn't you know it, the first game, and we already have an upset. 4-time FCS champion North Dakota State goes down against Montana. But Ian, I know you were watching the game really for one big reason, and that was to watch your boy Carson win. So talk to us a little bit about what you saw out of Carson, and if you have any general takes from the game, but whatever you want to talk about from there.
Yeah, so it was a rough game for Carson Wentz. So for people that aren't too familiar, 6'5", 6'6" quarterback, got the elite size, got a great arm. He really has a fantastic arm. Reminiscent of Joe Flacco when you watch him. So he struggles greatly with the deep ball, but even though he has this big arm, he just struggles with the accuracy. His footwork is a major problem. It's not very consistent. He'll shuffle his feet, and then his feet are either he has too wide of a base with his legs; they'll just be too far apart, whereas they should normally be around shoulder length apart. He is prone to just being a little too wide, and that'll cause a lot of accuracy issues. I would also say that he did suffer an injury around halftime, and that I think had a clear impact on his performance, but it wasn't really an excuse. It wasn't a significant injury. It was a lower body injury. So he's a terrific runner, and he wasn't really able to run in that second half. And again, that I don't think it was really a huge hindrance on his play, but it is worth mentioning. So, it was a decent performance from him, but overall he has accuracy issues. I charted his performance, and he was around 50% on accuracy of his throws as far as catchable balls, and really that's not acceptable as far as an NFL prospect goes. So, I think he's a guy, he was a hot name over the summer by some people, but realistically, I do think he's a legitimate prospect. I think you're looking at a mid-round prospect, and I'm not just judging that from that one game. I've seen a good amount of him, so I don't really need to see too much more of him this year. I'll probably watch him 2 more games this year, and I'll feel pretty comfortable of his eval, but I think he's more of a developmental quarterback at this stage in the game.
All right, good stuff. And certainly, hopefully down the line, we'll all get a chance to see more of Carson. But, like you said, big name, and I'm sure a lot of people were looking forward to him. And certainly not the best way to start, granted, I didn't exactly follow Montana, so I don't know how good their team was supposed to be this year. Certainly it goes down as an upset when I think they were unranked. go in against the number one team that's won championship 4 years in a row, and you go and beat
Yeah.
them. So,
Yeah, they were ranked number 12.
so they're a decent. Oh, okay, so there you go. So not
They
too
were,
bad.
and I tell you what though, I was really impressed with their play style. It was a lot of fun to watch. Just very fast paced, and their quarterback was actually more impressive than Wentz half the time. So
Well, there you go.
it was a fun game to watch. So if you ever see the replay on, and if you get bored, it was well worth it. Came down to the last possession. I was sitting there because I ended up watching it later. I went to a concert and came back and watched the end of it. And I tell you what, I rarely get too excited about football games anymore. As far as like the action, like I stay pretty level. I was on the edge of my seat at the end of that game. So if you haven't watched it yet, or if you don't know the ending of it, I do suggest checking that out. It's a great game.
All right. Let's talk about this week now. As like I said, the FBS schedule begins this week. I think one of the big games, and I guess we'll start with Thursday's games. And like Ian said, you could be listening to us on Thursday. So if you are, then this game's tonight. And that would be none other than Jim Harbaugh making his debut as head coach of Michigan. They are at Utah Thursday night, 8:30 on Fox Sports 1. What can we expect out of Harbaugh and the Wolverines this year?
I mean, that's a great question. It's not an overly talented team. They've got some leftover 5-star recruits, 4-star recruits that are in line to play quite a bit. But I think the thing is that these are guys that haven't produced in the last couple of years. Derek Green, their running back, is supposedly one of those former Uber recruits, and he was injured last year, so I'm interested in watching him play. But Harbaugh's really working with a limited deck here, and I think it's going to show. I honestly expect Utah to win. Utah is a very good team at home, and early season they give teams a lot of issues. For some reason, they break down usually a little bit more towards the end of the season, if and when they struggle. So I think early season, that's a team that's a little bit more veteran than Michigan as far as with their coaching staff, and they've got a senior quarterback, and I think that pays off big time. And usually when the teams are close, I go with the quarterback. So I don't think Michigan's going to be bad this year, but I don't think they get off on a right foot. And I think that's probably an 8-win team this year, despite the massive upgrade in coaching. It just takes a couple years sometimes to get that impact talent in there. And I'm not sure I don't think he had a terrific recruiting class anyway this year as soon as he got in, because he got in kind of late too. So it can be difficult to sway prospects at that point in the year.
Just looking over at some of the other games for Thursday, the game that'll kick the whole shebang off on ESPN. Oh, there's two games that kick off at 6 o'clock. Certainly the more notable one is on ESPN, is North Carolina takes on South Carolina at the home of the Panthers, Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte. So that'll certainly be an interesting game to watch. North Carolina, by some accounts, you see some of these talking heads and whatnot, they seem to be a sleeper in the ACC, so they'll be interesting to watch. And then obviously South Carolina, always a respectable program anymore under Steve Spurrier. The other game at 6 o'clock, by the way, is Florida International taking on Central Florida. Not exactly the headline-grabbing game.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about that one.
Just scrolling through, we actually have a couple ranked teams in action Thursday. 16th ranked Georgia Tech, and I'm looking on ESPN, and I believe they use the AP poll, obviously before we get to the playoff rankings. 16th ranked Georgia Tech takes on Alcorn State. Number 2 TCU is at Minnesota, 9 o'clock ESPN. That's certainly
the game.
That's probably the big game tomorrow.
Yep, that's the game to watch.
Trayvon Boykin and what looks to be a loaded TCU offense, and looks to be a pretty good defense coming back as well. I think they have quite a good bit of starters coming back. So, and being given number 2 preseason rank, obviously a lot of expectations down at TCU after just missing the playoffs this year. This certainly could be the year that TCU cracks the top 4 and gets to play for a championship.
They're definitely a talented team, and but I tell you what, I think they win that game. But don't be surprised if Minnesota gives them a fight. Minnesota doesn't really have the offense to really keep up with TCU, but their defense is pretty talented, and they've done a good job of adding NFL caliber talent and developing it the last few years. They've got a really talented secondary. It's going to be a fun matchup to watch. Those cornerbacks face Josh Doxson, who's an electric receiver, and then Listenby, the other receiver for TCU, is one of the fastest players in the country. So, I don't think it's gonna be a really close game. If you really want to watch a close game, I think Utah and Michigan may be a better bet. But I think as far as entertainment, I think it will be an entertaining game because TCU can really do some special things, and Minnesota does have enough talent to maybe surprise people, and maybe they do pull off at least a very close game.
Yeah. And certainly Minnesota has built themselves back up to being a respectable program coming off the bowl win last season over Missouri. So certainly this will be an interesting game to watch. And then you've got Arizona, ranked 22nd. They take on Texas San Antonio. And if you recall last year, Texas San Antonio nearly pulled off the upset of Arizona. Though I remember last year, I think a lot of people were high on the Roadrunners, and they just flat out disappointed. I think a lot of people thought they were really going to have a strong season. I think they only won like 3 games. So, and that was when they had Arizona at home. Now they got to go to Tucson. So could be an easy one for Arizona, but we'll see. Looking at Friday, Baylor and Michigan State and Boise State are all in action Friday night. Michigan State, Baylor actually both on the road. It's always interesting to see some of these top-ranked teams open the season on the road. But I guess when you have these home and homes, or at least in the case of Baylor, SMU, that's when you'll see these big names on the road. But so again, Baylor at SMU, Michigan State at Western Michigan, and then Boise State taking on Washington. Those are at least the ranked teams in action. Baylor is certainly going to be an interesting team to watch because obviously their high ranking is putting them in early position for a playoff. But once again, that non-conference schedule is atrocious.
Yeah.
And if they slip up during conference play, that could be, just like last season, what ultimately keeps Baylor out of the playoff.
Yeah, definitely. And they've been very difficult to match up for TCU, and TCU's been dominant the last few years, but Baylor's offense is it's so much to handle, and it's a really fun team to watch. As far as like prospects, they're a tough team to evaluate because they run such a simplified system that you basically have to relearn a lot of nuances in the NFL. So because you're not learning them in college, but it's a fun team to watch, and they're kind of like TCU in that it's just easy to appreciate them as far as like an entertainment value. And it's hard for me to buy into teams without a great defense. So, I don't really buy Baylor as a legitimate championship threat. But you never know. College football is wide open this year. You basically have Ohio State, and then you've got the field. And
pretty much, yeah.
I hope Ohio State doesn't lose, obviously, as an Ohio State, mega fan, but if they were to go down and not reach the playoff, it's wide open.
Absolutely. Michigan State's certainly an intriguing team to watch this year. Connor Cook is obviously going to have a lot of spotlight on him as arguably the best quarterback, definitely one of the best quarterbacks draft eligible for 2016. And, you can never count out Michigan State as a team. I was almost ready to say never count out a Tom Izzo coach team, but that's the wrong sport. Hey, it paid off in basketball.
That's right.
Picked them to go to the Final Four as a 7 seed, and it paid off. But no, Mark D'Antoni, I think
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's what I thought.
Another great
Yeah,
coach. Yep.
yeah. Can't count out Mark D'Antoni coached Spartan team. They should have an easy time against Western Michigan,
Yeah.
and Boise State always there to crash the party, as it be. In this case, the New Year's Six. They did it last year, and given their ranking now, certainly in a position to do so again. You have any thoughts on the Broncos?
Not many. You know, they've got two guys that are NFL prospects that I know of. Defensive end / edge rusher. His name's like Kamale Correa. I'm not sure if I said that right.
Oh yeah. A name us draft prospects are gonna have to study a pronunciation. We always love doing that, don't we?
It's that time of year, so.
Boise State can never give us names like Jay Smith as a prospect. Last year we had to figure out how to pronounce Ajayi, and now we have this.
Well, thankfully, they do have Darian Thompson
Okay,
at
that's
safety,
not bad.
so that's not bad at all. So that's definitely that can be handled.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so I don't really see too many interesting games. I'm not even sure if I'm going to watch the Boise State game in Washington. It's just not really sure if that's really the exposure I want to get to them. It's tough with the early season because you kind of just want to get a baseline for some of these players.
Yeah.
But I think Saturday is the real big game where there's a lot of big games.
And that's the tough thing. There's two things I was going to bring up. I was going to mention about Boise State. That game is so late too. 10:15 kickoff. That's why it's tough, like for us East Coasters, to get live shots of the West Coast because they're on so late. We have to stay up till 1 o'clock to watch the end of these games. But yeah, even when you're watching like these top teams, it's hard to get a full gauge on these teams yet because obviously they're playing scrub competition. The scrub teams are fine with it. They get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to visit these teams and get their butts kicked. But yeah, you're definitely right. Saturday is certainly the day to watch a lot of these teams. Just going to scroll through again using the AP poll. 9th-ranked Georgia against Louisiana Monroe. Ole Miss is in action against Tennessee Martin. Stanford's on the road against Northwestern. That's an interesting matchup. We'll get a look at Kevin Hogan there. Kind of scrolling through. Clemson takes on Wofford. Arkansas against UTEP. Auburn and Louisville.
Yep. That's one of the first big.
That's one of the big ones Saturday. Yep. Louisville against Auburn at the Georgia Dome, 3:30 on CBS. Auburn actually feels pretty underranked in the AP poll. I think in the coaches poll they're like number 3. But with that, they feel like they're the favorites. It feels like they're the favorites in the SEC over Alabama, and for good reason. Auburn looks like they have a very talented team coming in, very good quarterback. I mentioned one of their receivers when we were talking the Senior Bowl watch list, so Auburn looks like they're going to be a fun team, and without a doubt will be in contention for the playoffs. Would not be surprising if they make it to the playoffs.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. And the one thing that I would start with is their quarterback, Jeremy Johnson.
Yeah. And
he's electric. And we've only seen a few minutes of him play. Obviously, Nick Marshall last year, he was suspended at the start of the year. And so Jeremy Johnson, a junior at the time, came in and played. Well, he's a senior now. And I tell you what, in those few minutes of tape that he has, it's hard not to feel like this is a potential superstar. And I say that with the caveat of that's with like 4 or 5 minutes of a cut up. So although I saw all of his plays against Arkansas last year, who knows? Who knows if he can do that, excuse me, over an entire season or even do it, consistently enough to force his way into the top quarterback discussion. But he's got the skill set. He's got the ability to make you say, wow, when he throws the ball. When the ball comes out of his hands, it makes you definitely take notice. So I'm definitely going to be watching that game for him at a later time, but I'll actually be recording that, and I will be live charting Christian Hackenberg's performance against Temple.
And without a doubt, that's the game that I'm going to be watching a little bit live as well, because obviously I'm a Penn State fan, Penn State alum, so yeah, 3:30 ESPN. The Nittany Lions are down at the Link to take on Temple, and yeah, obviously Christian Hackenberg is going to be the name to watch. Jordan Lucas, another name to watch. Anthony Zettel, two guys we discussed again when we talked Senior Bowl. So it's definitely an experienced team for sure now, because they were. And I guess that's what happens when you have a very young roster in the first year of a head coach. So at least there's a lot of players here that have familiarity with James Franklin. So it's definitely going to be interesting to watch how they perform this season. They definitely feel good. Obviously, I'd love to see them do great. Realistically, I think they're maybe third at best in the Big Ten, obviously. Because I don't see how this team matches up with Ohio State or Michigan State. It may be close with Wisconsin. We just mentioned briefly Minnesota. They could be up there a little bit. Iowa's always a bit of a sneaky team. So it's certainly top heavy in the Big Ten between the Buckeyes and the Spartans, and then it's just kind of a pick your poison in that middle section there. But certainly Penn State has a chance to go to a good bowl. Maybe a bowl like the Gator Bowl or Outback, whatever. So should be interesting. Let's see. Then we got UCLA taking on Virginia, BYU at Nebraska.
Real quick on that Virginia UCLA game, that I'm going to be watching that one for sure at a later time because super phenom freshman Josh Rosen will be starting for UCLA at quarterback, and I've heard from multiple people that I really trust in high school recruiting that he could be like the next Peyton Manning type player. And they were very reluctant to use that comparison. They were like, this isn't something we use lightly. And honestly, the one guy was like, I honestly hate to say this, but, Peyton Manning would be my comp. So I'm definitely going to be checking that game out. He is extremely hyped, not only just from people I know, but also from recruiting services. So,
yeah.
That's definitely an intriguing game to watch. Maybe he turns out. And, I mean, his story will not be written this Saturday, but it's the start of a story.
It's the start, yeah. 3:30 Fox Saturday for those listening and wanting to check that out. Tennessee, a lot of talk about their quarterback and a bit of a sleeper team in the SEC. They got Bowling Green this week. Missouri against Southeast Missouri State. Our boy Jacoby Brissett and NC State, they host Troy. Oklahoma against Akron. Arizona State, Texas A&M. The Aggies are always an interesting team anymore. Texas visiting Notre Dame. That should be fun.
Yep.
Wisconsin, Alabama in Arlington. And I believe that is where College Game Day is going to be this week.
Yeah, I believe you're right.
Certainly that's going to be a fun game. Florida State against Texas State, USC against Arkansas State. And then this is an interesting game. There's a lot of talk about Vernon Adams. I think that's his name, right? Vernon Adams.
Yeah, yep.
The new starting quarterback at Oregon. And ironically, his first game as an Oregon Duck is against his old school, Eastern Washington. But from what I'm, reading and hearing, there is a lot of hype on this Adams kid.
He's a fun guy to watch. So I ended up seeing him last year. I was charting Marcus Peters for Washington, the cornerback, and they played Eastern Washington. And I'm just a freak, and I watched every single snap of Peters to get a good feel for him. And so I saw Vernon Adams play last year, and he's tiny. He's like 5'9", 180 pounds soaking wet.
Oof. Wow.
But he's like a really fun college player to watch.
Yeah.
And so, especially in that system, it may take some time for him to really get settled in, but he's a lot of fun to watch. He's definitely worth it if you're just watching for like a half, because I'm guessing that's probably all he's going to play. I mean, I still expect Oregon to blow people out.
Unfortunately, I do not get the Pac-12 network, so I probably won't be able to watch that game live, but we'll certainly see highlights. And then, well, one game Saturday, but that's, not worth, Purdue at Marshall if you're interested.
Yeah.
And then Monday night
It's the big one.
is the big one. It is the reigning, defending, national champion, the Ohio State University, looking to avenge their one and only loss of 2014 as they take on Virginia Tech. You're the Buckeye fan. You're the guru. Break it down for us, buddy.
Well, a lot's changed in a year. I'll tell you that. Last time they played, Ohio State had brand new offensive line, brand new quarterback, had just lost their rock, and they're basically their soul of the team, Braxton Miller. And I tell you what, obviously the tables have turned, and I think we're going to see probably a game it's going to be very physical. Ohio State's probably going to start JT Barrett. That's my guess. And JT Barrett, again, was the one that lost last year. But it was also kind of a point where after halftime, he started to really show some growth. And now he's a completely different player. He's extremely efficient. He's a very, very precise passer. He's reminiscent of me for Alex Smith in the NFL, which is a compliment. Alex Smith gets a bad rap in the NFL at times, and rightfully so. But whenever you're comparing a college player to him, I think that's a major, major positive. Ohio State's they're just loaded. I mean, it's hard to see that team losing, and they're going to be very motivated that night. Virginia Tech, I don't see how Virginia Tech scores. And that's not saying because of Ohio State. That's just because of their own limitations as a roster. They don't really have a good offense in general. They've got a really good tight end in Bucky Hodges. He's my number one tight end entering the season. That's draft eligible. But they don't have anyone to get him the ball. So Ohio State obviously is going to score. Whether through passing or running with Ezekiel Elliott. So I just don't see how Virginia Tech's going to keep up with them. It's probably going to be a fairly close game because it's on the road. It's the start of the season. It's very difficult for teams to be sharp that early. But I think this is going to be kind of like Alabama-Wisconsin. I don't think Alabama-Wisconsin's going to be an overly close game. I think you're maybe looking at a couple touchdowns difference. Not quite a blowout, but it won't be overly close.
Yeah, there's some talk that Wisconsin's actually a little bit overrated.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Especially, there's people that don't agree with them being ranked. But yeah, definitely there has to be that motivation factor for Ohio State, even with being the defending champs. When it comes to college, you always want to get after the team that beat you the previous year. I was even like that when playing high school. You just, because especially in football, losses eat at you. They really do, because it's only one game, and chances are you won't see that team at least till the next year. So Ohio State will certainly be hungry. Now, granted, Joey Bosa is suspended, but they are certainly talented enough outside of Bosa that I think they should be able to overcome his loss, especially in a game like this. And not having done a ton of research, just going a little bit on gut instinct here, but I have to feel like Ohio State is going to repeat as national champions this year.
I sure hope so, because this year was always supposed to be, the year. Last year was pretty crazy because even when Braxton was healthy, everyone thought 2015 is our year because everyone's going to be a year older, more experienced, that's when everybody will flourish. So we'll see. I mean, like you said, losing Bosa hurts, but I don't think it's going to be a huge deal. In the grand scheme of things, I just don't think they're going to need him against Virginia Tech. But we'll see. It'd be a pretty shocking loss, I think.
So, yeah, that's our college football preview spectacular, I guess. A look at week 1. And certainly we'll talk more college in the coming weeks, especially next week, because we've got Michigan State, Oregon. Just like last season, could very well be a determining factor for the college football playoffs. So, a lot of fun early games to look forward to. So, it's pretty much here. So enjoy the ride. If you're a college fan, buckle in because it starts tomorrow, and then by the time we join you next week, we'll be talking NFL regular season week 1.
Absolutely.
It is going to be fun. So, anything else you'd like to add for tonight?
I don't think so. It's gonna be a great weekend. Make sure you follow each of us to get takes and get. I'm sure I'm going to be doing breakdowns for sure. I already did all my articles for the week ahead of time, a couple days ahead of time, just so I could focus on the games this weekend. So
sit back and enjoy.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll have a few takes on Penn State as well. So it should be fun. It's always fun seeing that first full Saturday.
Yeah.
Of the college season.
And I'll be charting some of these quarterbacks too. So on my new site, just watch for Twitter, and I'll tweet out the links to quarterback charts. So Christian Hackenberg will be done as soon as that game's done, and then guys like Jeremy Johnson, I'll probably do like either that night or that next day, as I catch back up.
Yeah, and I actually caught wind a little bit of your new site, Draft Centric. Definitely looks nice, I gotta say. So, it looks like you're doing a lot with it, and it should be a fun project for you. So I wish you the best of luck with that.
Yeah, thanks, man. I'm really excited. So if people want to check it out, it's draftcentric.weebly.com. I also launched a Twitter account for it. It's just at draftcentric, and so yeah, definitely check it out. It's it'll be fun.
Absolutely. So I think that'll wrap it up for this week, and hope you guys enjoyed listening as always. Like Ian said, you can catch us on Twitter, and enjoy all the great football action next week, and we'll hit you up next week when we'll finally start talking regular season football. So for Ian Wharton, I am Bill Rossetti. Thanks for listening to the Gridiron Graduates, and we will see you next time. Take care, everybody.